Welcome to the book club where the size is just right, the books aren't too long, and you never need to host. That's our job. We bring best-selling and award-winning writers of every genre to Twin Cities metro area libraries to share their stories, discuss their work, and answer those burning questions you've always wanted to ask your favorite authors. This is a book club where we don't have to argue about what the author meant. They can tell us. The book club that doesn't require a clean house or wine and cheese. And in this book club, if you haven't read the book, it's all right. Although, we hope you'll be inspired to pick it up next time you're in the library. I'm your host, Slade Kemet, and you can consider the book club rewritten because this is Club Book. Club Book is made possible by Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, MELSA, and Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. We would also like to thank our partnering bookseller, Red Balloon Bookshop. This podcast features ReShonda Tate at Washington County Library, Wildwood. ReShonda Tate is as versatile as she is prolific. In total, the best-selling author has published more than 50 books to date. Tate runs a wide gamut from contemporary romance to teen fiction to nonfiction and even poetry. Standouts include her sophomore novel, Let the Church Say Amen, which was adapted for the screen by producer Queen Latifah and actor-turned-director Regina King. Tate turns her prodigious talents to historical fiction in 2024 with Queen of Sugar Hill, which spotlights the largely unknown story of Hollywood actress Hattie McDaniel. Best known for her portrayal of Mammy in Gone with the Wind, McDaniel holds a notable distinction as the first African-American woman to win an Academy Award. Unfortunately for her, the historic Oscar would put her in the crosshairs of controversy for the rest of her life. In an early review, historical fiction mainstay Jillian Cantor raves that The Queen of Sugar Hill is an impeccably researched biographical novel, brimming with heart, heartbreak, and resilience.
Thank you. Hello, cold Minnesota.
This ain't cold.
This is freezing.
This is nothing.
I came from Houston. I left like 80 degrees. But I am so happy to be here. I'm so happy to be here sharing with you tonight about this wonderful, wonderful story that I've spent the last 3 years researching and working on. And, I'm going to take you back a little bit to how I became interested in this. My grandmother loved Gone with the Wind. She just swore by the movie. She loved it. And I was watching it with her once when I was a young girl, and I didn't like Hattie McDaniel's character, Mammy. And my grandmother, was mortified because she loved the movie. And she said, well, why don't you like her? And I said, well, because she's playing this maid and she's so over the top and I just don't like her. And my grandmother said, but she's playing a maid and I am a maid. Why are you looking at her with disdain? And my grandmother said, I would much rather play a maid than be a maid. And I thought, she has something. She's onto something there. And then my grandmother said, plus it's 1939. What did you think she was going to play, Scarlett O'Hara? And it was then that I started looking at Hattie McDaniel in a different light. And I realized over the years that I really adored her, and I had to take off my 21st century lens and look at her through the time that she was. And my grandmother had actually pointed out that in the movie, Mammy was the stronghold. Mammy was the one that held everyone together. And for some reason, we had over the years just looked at the negative side of Mammy and the role that she was playing. So I became fascinated with her, and I started doing research on her. I had numerous books in just regular fiction and decided that I wanted to do something different. And I'm a journalist by trade. So coming into the research came natural. And historical fiction was an amazing fit for me because I could lay the foundation with the facts and the research and fill in the blanks with the fiction. So I began setting out to tell Hattie's story. And I went, like so many people do, I initially went to the internet. And I quickly discovered that the majority of the information about Hattie McDaniel on the internet was wrong. If you Google her now, Wikipedia and several articles will talk about her husband, George Langford. And I went on a deep dive because I couldn't confirm this husband, George Langford. Long story short, Hattie McDaniel never had a husband named George Langford. Someone wrote an article saying that, and then someone else repeated that article, and over the years, just this erroneous information has gotten out there. And it was one thing after another like that I kept finding. So I got out from behind my laptop and I went to research libraries. And I spent time at research libraries in California, in Washington, D.C., and then I went through the Census Bureau, went through newspapers, and just kept finding myself getting more and more fascinated with all the information we didn't know. And so I would go down these rabbit holes of research, and it got to the point one of my friends said, okay, can you stop researching and write the book? But I really was getting lost, and I was like, well, how did I not know this? And how have I never learned this? And so I wanted to tell her story. And I was visiting her home, it's not, she sold it years ago, but her home in Sugar Hill. And it's like her spirit was talking to me, tell my story. My mother says I need to stop telling y'all that because I sound crazy, but that's how us writers work. She kept saying, tell my story. And so I set out to tell her story. And I, along the way, just tried to go back and forth with how much of fiction am I putting in. The book is set up so that all of the foundation, everything that went on in the book, all of that is the facts. That's the historical accuracy. The fiction comes in filling in the blanks. For example, after the Academy Awards, the whole Gone with the Wind team, they had swept the Academy Awards in 1940. They went to a nightclub to celebrate their win. We know that's a fact. We know that when they got to that nightclub, the security wouldn't let Hattie McDaniel in. And so all of that is the fact. The fiction comes in. I don't know exactly what the security guard said to Hattie McDaniel, so I get to go and use my creative side and fill in the blanks. And so I was able to do a lot of that because Hattie had a habit that was a detriment to her sometimes of writing everything down. She would just write these letters, she would get mad at the world, and she would go spill her guts out on paper. And then she'd often send it to the newspaper and just create a whole other set of problems. But it was because she was frustrated. And I felt her frustration throughout my journey of research because she just wanted to act. She grew up in poverty. She came to Hollywood and was able to get this magnificent opportunity. She auditioned for Gone with the Wind, for Mammy for a role that everybody wanted. Eleanor Roosevelt had called the director and she wanted her real life maid to play Mammy. Every black actress in Hollywood auditioned for that role. And so Hattie McDaniel was actually working as a maid. She left that job, kept her maid's uniform on, and went to audition for the role. And people thought, well, she's really trying to get into character. No, she was coming for work and didn't want to be late. But she was the last one to audition, and she auditioned with Vivien Leigh, and they had immediate chemistry, and David O. Selznick gave her the part. And the director didn't want Hattie, but she said, I'm going to set out with something to prove. And so she was so excited about this role, but then she ran into a problem once it came out. White people didn't like her because they felt like Mammy was too sassy. Black people didn't like her because they hated the demeaning stereotypes. So she couldn't find her place in this world, and it was so frustrating for her. The black newspapers would just tear her to shreds. The NAACP staged an all-out war against her, and actors like her. There's one scene in the book that when I was doing my research, and I just could not believe this actually happened, the NAACP invited Hattie McDaniel to the 1942 National Convention. She thought she was going to get honored. And they brought on the stage, they talked about all the efforts they're making in Hollywood. And she got up and got ready to come up and be recognized because he said, I'm calling an actress to the stage. And he called Lena Horne to the stage. And Walter White, he was the executive secretary of the NAACP. And he said, this is the type of woman we want America to see. This is the black image we want portrayed. We don't want Hattie McDaniel's Mammy. And so she had to sit in the audience with her head held high. And it was that type of thing that she encountered all the time. So it was fascinating to me to see her journey and just trying to be accepted. She really was frustrated because she just wanted to be an actress. So she would always use the example of Lucille Ball. She said Lucille Ball is a silly comedian who everybody loves, and she's able to be comedic and no one judges her. But I do the same thing, and it's an indictment on my whole race. And so she was extremely frustrated about that. And that was the type of journey that she had all the time. So in The Queen of Sugar Hill, I talk about that journey. I open up the night of the Academy Awards. And many of you may know that she was not invited to the Academy Awards. David O. Selznick, the producer of Gone with the Wind, had to pull strings and fight to get her to attend. And they finally allowed her to come. She showed up the night of, and security wouldn't let her in. So they had to find David O. Selznick. He came out, and he finally got her in, but she sits all the way in the back of the room. They sit her in the back by the kitchen with her date, and her agent. And the rest of the Gone with the Wind cast and crew are sitting closer to the front because everyone knew who had won because it was released early by mistake. So Hattie knew that she won, and she's sitting all the way in the back of the room. She was so far back that by the time she reached the front, the music had stopped playing. And so when we look back on that, we're all, immediately we'll get upset and say, that's so sad and tragic. But Hattie looked at it like, but I was in the room. And that had never happened before. She was the first Black person other than a waitress or a janitor to even be allowed into the Coconut Grove, the Ambassador Hotel where it was held. So that was the way that she looked at it. And she was excited about winning. She initially had a speech that the company had prepared for her, and at the last minute she decided to speak from her heart. And that's why you get the tearful thank you to everyone for all that she had done. Now, Clark Gable, in the book, I do have Clark Gable at the Academy Awards. In real life, Clark Gable did not attend that Academy Awards because they did find out who won because the Los Angeles Times broke the embargo. And so Clark was getting dressed. He found out he didn't win. He took his tux off and went smoked a cigarette. But because I wanted to establish their relationship, and I only have so many pages to do it, I put him there and reimagined how it would have been. And I do explain that in my historical notes. Because I wanted to explore something else I did not know, and that was just the great friendship between Clark Gable and Hattie McDaniel. And they were really, really great friends. He had a great sense of humor, and they loved playing practical jokes on each other. And so he was her right hand, he was her motivator through everything, and she had to be his voice of reason because the Atlanta premiere of Gone with the Wind would not let Hattie attend. And they had over 1 million people there, and they removed Hattie from all of the promotional material, and they said, no way can she come. So Clark Gable said, well, I'm not coming. And Hattie said, you're the king of Hollywood, and you're Rhett, so you have to go. And so it was because of her fighting for him to go, making him go, and saying, I appreciate you standing up for me, but this is about you right now. And so he did go ahead and go. But he was doing that type of thing all the time. Even on set, he was the reason that they integrated the cafeteria. He was the reason that they integrated the restrooms. And so I didn't know that about Clark Gable and was really glad to see that part of him. And I include him in the story as well as her friendship with Betty Davis, her friendship with Dorothy Dandridge, and just the tight-knit community she had with her friends in Hollywood. I also really explore Sugar Hill, which I did not know was a place that Hattie McDaniel had dreamed of living since she set her foot in Los Angeles. And she bought this mansion. She paid $10,000 above asking costs. She moved in only to have her neighbors say, we don't want you here. And they sued with a little known law called restrictive covenants. And restrictive covenants said that you cannot sell your home to anyone who is not of pure European descent. And so they used that to sue Hattie and other Black members, residents of the Sugar Hill neighborhood. And Hattie McDaniel said, did you hear me say I paid $10,000 above asking costs? This is my dream home. I'm not going away that easy. And she went to court. And in the 1940s, you didn't normally see that, but she surprisingly won this case and was allowed to stay in her home. And that was the catalyst for the Supreme Court case that struck down restrictive covenants. So people don't even realize that black and brown people across the country can live in whatever neighborhood they want because Hattie McDaniel led the fight against restrictive covenants. And so I was excited to learn that part, and that's part of, all of that is included in the book. I also include Hattie's love life. Hattie's love life. Whew. She had 4 husbands. Not the one that is all on Wikipedia, but in my research, I did find another husband. And she kind of wanted to keep him under wraps, so he wasn't in newspapers or publicized, probably because he had another wife and was probably trying to lay low. She did know that he had another wife. She found out he had another wife when he disappeared. He left and went to the grocery store and never came back. And she couldn't find him for years. She finally tracked him down in New York where he was with his wife, that he was actually married to before he married her. So she had bad luck when it came to husbands. Her last husband left her penniless, and he was a character, and I didn't hold back in sharing his story. But when they broke up, and Hattie, you know how you with your grandmother, you discover your grandmother did some things that you don't want to know about? That's how I felt when I was reading some of the things about Hattie's love life. I was like, I don't want to know this. Hattie loved the men. And the men loved Hattie. I felt like I needed a flow chart at one point. And so I did take the fiction a part of a lot of Hattie's lovers. She had a lot of younger lovers. And I just made them into one because I was like, the reader can't keep up with all these people. I can't keep up. So we're just going to make him into one. So that is part of the fiction in telling the story. There was also, though, because Hattie did have such bad luck with men, she did have a little dabbling with an actress named Tallulah Bankhead. And Tallulah took her to what was called the Sewing Circle. And the Sewing Circle was a place in Hollywood where wives of prominent men, many of them directors who worked in the industry, they were gay, but you couldn't really do that back then. So they had these lavender marriages. Well, the wives would get together with other women who wanted to be together, and they would meet up in the Sewing Circle to not sew. And so Hattie went and she did have a relationship with Tallulah. And I struggled with that. I was like, do I want to tell this? Do I want to include this? But that's her history. That's her story. And so I did not want to leave that out. What I just took away from her story in general was just the resilience, how life continued to knock her down as she just kept getting back up. She really wanted children. She never had children. There is a very tragic part of her story in her quest to have children. So I explore all of that. I really do, from the Gone with the Wind, the night she won the Oscar, that's where the book opens. I don't do a cradle to the grave story, but I start when the night she won, and I take it through her death, where she died at 52 years of age from breast cancer. And so, her story sounds tragic because of all that she's gone through, but just because I feel like Hattie and I are BFFs now, she would have me tell you, don't weep for her, because we have a tendency to look at all that she didn't have, and she chose to look at what I do have. And that has been one of the most inspiring parts of this journey for me, in discovering that, and then traveling all over the country. I'm on tour with this book and introducing people to Hattie McDaniel. I am surprised there are a lot of people that have never heard of her, people over 40, and I'm like, so you've never heard of it? And they haven't. And then introducing her to a younger generation. My son is 16, and he's been with me on this journey. He went with me to Los Angeles. He had no interest in her house. He just wanted to go surf. But he continues, I'm constantly talking to her about him because I want the legacy to live on. It took me about a year to get him to realize her name was not Hattie LaBelle. He kept calling her Hattie LaBelle. But he's like, well, why didn't we know all of this, Mom? And I said, well, that's what I'm hoping to do, is just reignite the fire for her and to let people know about her.
With that, we have reached the part of our podcast where we turn to our club book audience for questions and comments for ReShonda Tate and her work. In this book club, we like to encourage members and authors to connect and engage and help bridge the gap between the page you read and the process it took to write it. Our first question of the night comes from an audience member wondering how Tate was able to research and portray all of Hattie McDaniel's friendships.
All of that is accurate. She was very good friends with Louise Beavers, who played in Imitation of Life. Lillian, who played, Lily Randolph was Mammy Two Shoes in the Tom and Jerry cartoon. And she was also in It's a Wonderful Life. And Ruby Dandridge, who was Dorothy Dandridge's mother. So they all had a tight-knit relationship. And they bonded because they all went to the same auditions. That's the only thing that they could play at that time, were maids, servants, and slaves. So every black actress in Hollywood, they were all auditioning for that same role. So they became friends in that manner. And what I wanted to show was that even though Hattie had, a white community that didn't appreciate her, a black community that didn't appreciate her, she did have a core group of friends who would sometimes have to rein her in, because she, as I said, she would get out that pen and paper and try to reply to people all the time. You know how a troll is attacking you online and you want to say something? Well, that's what Hattie was doing with her pen. And it would get her into trouble sometimes. And her friends really did help her. And she did the same thing. When Clark Gable's wife died, she was there for him and just tried to help drag him out of his depression. So I wanted to make sure that was an integral part of the story. And I got all of that through the research, which included the letters that she would write to other people, the letters that they would write among themselves as well.
This audience member asks if Tate has any interest in Butterfly McQueen.
Yes, I loved Butterfly McQueen, but they're contrasting. So they had issues on the set of Gone with the Wind, because Butterfly McQueen was not anything like her character Prissy. Butterfly McQueen was the type of person that would burn the plantation down. And so she wanted Hattie to be more vocal, but Hattie was a quiet warrior. I call her a quiet change agent. And so they bumped heads because there was a scene where Vivian slaps Butterfly in Gone with the Wind. And she slapped her for real, really hard. So Butterfly's ready to jump her. And so she's going ballistic, and the director basically was like, you gotta go. You can't mess with my star. And she was very vocal, and she ended up being blackballed. So she didn't work a whole lot. And that was Hattie's thing. Hattie was saying, I want to make change my way. And I think there's room for both type of change agents in this world. The militant ones, and then the ones like Hattie that want to make change from the inside. But Butterfly harbored a lot of resentment because she wanted everybody to be like her and grab some matches to burn some stuff down.
This question is if there are any plans for a movie adaptation of the novel.
Yes, so it was, when it came out, it was on the Today Show as one of the best reads for February. And then the Today Show host, Craig Melvin, said, that should be a movie. And I was sitting in my living room screaming, from your lips to God's ears. So yes, I am proud to say that we have several options that we're working on. Thank you. So I'm hopeful that they will come through. we have enough that we can kind of take our pick. So I'm doing one interview after another. And it's funny, it's hard because I'm interviewing with all these actresses and producers trying to convince me, and I'm like, yes, 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 yes. But I have to be professional.
Our next question is who Tate thinks should play the character of Hattie McDaniel.
I learned from my movie, I had a movie before, Let the Church Say Amen with Regina King, and I had all these visions in my head, and they brought the First Lady, and they brought in an actress named Layla Rashawn, and she was in a movie called Waiting to Exhale, but she's always played like this sex kitten role. And they brought her in to be the First Lady. And when they brought her in to be the First Lady, I was like, y'all know she a sex kitten, right? But she was an amazing First Lady because an actress or an actor can take a role and make their own. So I really stay away from who do I think would be the best. Now, I gave you that whole trip around the corner to tell you Danielle Brooks from The Color Purple. I can definitely see her. And then another person that I can see that I know had some interest at one time was Gabby Sidibe. And she played Precious, but she relates to Hattie so much. And then of course Octavia Spencer. So we'll see who does it.
This member from the audience asks if Tate has any plans for other historical fiction novels.
Yes, this is my lane now. I absolutely love it. I am actually working already on my next book, and it is on Hazel Scott. And Hazel Scott is the biggest jazz singer ever, black or white. And she was married to Adam Clayton Powell Jr., one of the richest women in the world. And she was all but erased from history because she fought for civil rights. And she was the first black woman to have a television show. But because she fought for civil rights, they deemed her a communist. And she was all but run out of America. And so her story is fascinating, and I'm telling her story next.
Our next question is how ReShonda Tate is able to write and publish books at such a frequent rate, often multiple books a year.
Well, one, I can't write historical fiction like that with multiple books because I'm spending forever researching. But I used to write one adult book, and then I have a line of books for teenagers. So I would write a book for the teens. I would write 2 books for teens and an adult book, all while being a television news anchor. So I was holding down my day job. But the way that I'm able to write all of these books, this is my 54th book actually. But the way that I'm able to do all of this and still have a day job, which I do, just because I'm a journalist and I enjoy, is because I believe every minute you spend talking about what you don't have time to do could be spent doing it. And so I utilize all my spare moments. Even when I was a news reporter, I'm covering a trial. I've learned to listen to the evidence and then discard the evidence we don't need and scribble away on my pad. And we were covering a murder trial once with a woman named Andrea Yates who killed her 5 kids. And so I'm writing away throughout the whole trial, and I'm making all the competitors at the other station nervous. And so a reporter friend came up to me afterwards and said, okay, what am I missing? What are you working on? I said, I'm working on chapter 7 of my next book. Because I'm scribbling away throughout the trial. So yes, I utilize those spare moments. I'm in Houston, so I drive a lot. So I dictate into my audio memos, and then I send it to a transcription service called Timmy, and they send it back to me. They transcribe it. So I have my first draft essentially done by the time I get out the car and get in the house. So that's how I'm able to kind of get it all done. But I've had to slow down because these historical fiction people, especially when you're doing it in a different time frame, you have to get the language right, you have to get all of that right, or readers will let you know.
This fan inquires about Tate's research process to get accurate language and dialogue.
So I go back to newspapers. I also do a lot of ads. So if you look at the ads from the 1940s, you can get the attire, you can get what people are looking at. I look at a lot of the slang. And so I get the story out first, and then I go back in and make sure certain words they said at the time. So I need to make sure that they called Hollywood Tinseltown in 1940. I have to make sure every little nuance like that. So you can literally spend 3 hours on one sentence. And that's why it takes a long time to write historical fiction.
Another audience member wonders if Tate has any help with the research process.
I don't, because this was my first book. I'm hoping that people buy it and I can hire a researcher because it is a lot of work. Yeah, I tried to hire my kids, and that does not work. I fired both daughters like 6 times. So no, I did all the research myself. I took my mother to try and man a table at a book signing once, and everyone started swarming her afterwards, and it was too much. She just started giving the book away. Here. So I have to do it all myself. Yep, she gave away like 12 books before we figured out what she was doing.
This club book member asks if ReShonda Tate has always had an interest in writing.
Yes, I have loved making up stories ever since I was a little girl. My mother called it lying. But for me, it was just this active imagination. I remember in the 5th grade, I wrote a what I did on summer vacation essay. And I wrote how I grew up in a really bad gang-infested neighborhood in Houston, and how I had to watch drug dealers and elderly ladies get mugged, and just how difficult my life was. And my teacher called my mother and said, "ReShonda's a good student. Let me know if you need anything." And my mother said, "Gangs? Drug-infested neighborhood? What are you talking about? We live in a nice middle-class neighborhood." And my teacher said, "Well, why did you write that?" And I said, "I don't know. I went to summer camp, and this just sounded so much better." And it was at that point that they explained the difference between fact and fiction to me. But I've loved it. I've loved writing stories. And so I had my first published story. There used to be a magazine called True Confessions. Yeah, so y'all know about True Confessions. So you know that a 15-year-old had no business reading it, let alone writing for it. But I wrote a story called I Stole My Sister's Husband. And I left off the fact that I was 15 and my sister was 12. Didn't put that part in. But they published it. And they sent me a check for $150. I never cashed the check because I was too scared to tell my mother where the money came from. But that was my first published piece. And then I went to the University of Texas at Austin. I majored in journalism because my mother kept saying, "You need to get a real job. You can't make money writing books. Go get a real job." Now, when the book career took off, she was the main one saying, "Well, when you can buy your mama a car?" But at the time, she wasn't filling my dreams. So I graduated from UT Austin, and then I went to work for the National Enquirer. I was the paparazzi. I thought that I would get to go to the Enquirer and make some stuff up. But first of all, I didn't want the job because I was a journalist. I had majored in journalism, and I only went because it was a free trip to West Palm Beach for the interview. And I was like, I get to go to the beach. And they offered me the job after the interview, and I said, "No, I'm sorry, I'm a real journalist. I can't come work for the National Enquirer." And they said, "But you'll live on West Palm Beach, you'll love it." I said, "No, I'm a real journalist." And they said, "Well, the starting salary is $130,000. I said, "Well, when do I start?" But after a year, I hated digging up dirt and gossip on celebrities. And so I left the National Enquirer, and I came back and I worked in journalism, but I kept that love of writing fiction. So by day I would work for a TV news station, and by night I would come home and just write stories until I got a self-published because I got rejected several times on my first book. Couldn't get a book deal for anything under the sun, so I self-published, and I am an outside-the-box thinker. It's about, how do I get this book? They don't know who I am. How do I get this book into the hands of people? So I would do things like call a bookstore here in Minnesota and say, "Hi, do you carry My Brother's Keeper by ReShonda Tate Billingsley?" That was the name I wrote under. They say, "No, we don't have it, never heard of it." I would call back about 3 hours later. "Hi, do you carry this book called My Brother's Keeper?" No joke. They said, "No, we don't have that book." I'm not even kidding. I would call back right before closing. "I'm looking for this book. Call my brother's keeper. And they said, we don't have it, but we need to get it because everybody's calling about this book. And I did that in store after store, day after day. The bookseller owner is like, that was you on the phone? I did. But what I did, I was just trying to get the book out and get attention. I knew that it was a good story, and so I did. The booksellers started carrying it, and they would tell people that came in, you know, I hadn't read it, but everybody calls about it, so. And then that book caught the attention of an agent who got me a deal with Simon & Schuster, and they re-released the book, and here I am 54 books later.
Our next question is if ReShonda Tate can share a little bit about her novel, Miss Pearlie's Girls.
I would love to. Miss Pearlie's Girl is near and dear to my heart. It is about these sisters who are estranged because of secrets that this family has held. Now, my grandmother, Pearlie, is looking down from heaven and is saying to me, tell those people that that's not our family. So that's not our family. I'm going to tell y'all that because that's my grandmother's disclaimer, but this is everybody's family. And it really is how secrets can destroy a family. And so I really wanted to write about these sisters who had all of these secrets, and it started because of the grandmother. It's just inspired by my grandmother. We really didn't have as much dysfunction, okay, Grandma? As much dysfunction. But we had it, and I really wanted to explore it so that people could look at it and just look at their own relationships and perhaps heal. Each sister had a different secret that really one way or another had affected their relationship. And it takes place in a small town called Smackover, Arkansas, which is real. It is real. That is originally where I'm from, where my grandmother lived, where my mother was born. People think that's fictional. Nope, that's real, Smackover, Arkansas. So yes, that was my book right before The Queen of Sugar Hill.
Our last question of the night comes from an audience member wondering if ReShonda Tate has seen all of Hattie McDaniel's films.
Well, do you know she was in 70 films before Gone with the Wind? Most of them were unaccredited. I went back and I watched Gone with the Wind, and I watched it through different eyes. And I was able to appreciate it. I did not have that disdain I had growing up. And, I don't know that I'll say that it would ever be one of my most favorite movies ever, but as a writer, I love the cinematography, I love the beauty of all of it, and I love being able to tell other people that. I talked about it on my Facebook page, and the number of people that have gone back to watch the movie, it just makes me feel great. They're like, okay, I'm gonna go now and look at it differently, and then they come back and say, okay, I can appreciate this because I did look at it differently. I did also watch In This Our Life with Bette Davis, because that was the role Hattie McDaniel really was excited about. She thought the Oscar would change her life. She thought that it would open doors to better roles. It did not. And she was excited about In This Our Life because though she still had to play a maid, it was more focused on her being a mother. And she was really excited about that because it was an Oscar-worthy role again. And then they ended up cutting out the roles where she delivered that performance and kept the only part of her where she was just being an over-the-top maid. So that hurt her, but she couldn't break out of the maid, servants, and slave because that's all they had for her at that time. Well, I am so honored that you all came out tonight. I'm very excited about it. I'm excited about sharing Hattie's story. I love going around the country and talking about her. And one of the things, especially when they had the 2020 Cancel Gone with the Wind movement and Cancel Mammy movement, I love shedding a new light on Hattie and getting people to take off that lens. We're always talking about having people cancel our history. People want to take away our history. And canceling even the part that we don't agree with. We may not like how Mammy was treated, but it's a part of our history. And instead of looking at it in a negative way, look at it at what she did bring to the table. And she wanted so bad to be a credit to her race. And so that is one of the things that I'm hoping to shine a light on. I did have this elderly woman, she had to be over 100. She said she had just had her 100th birthday. And she said that the book made her shed her guilt of loving Mammy. And what I loved about that is that she loved Mammy, she loved the story, but since the 2020 cancel, Gone with the Wind, she felt guilty about loving Mammy and loving the story. And this is saying to you, Hattie was more than Mammy. It is okay to love her character, and I love the woman that brought so much joy to so many and opened so many doors for so many people. So that is my mission, to show that she was more than Mammy. Thank you all so much. I can't wait to sign your book.
That wraps up our Washington County Library event with ReShonda Tate. Make sure to catch our next podcast with Tommy Orange. Tommy Orange is an enrolled member of the Cheyenne and Arapaho tribes of Oklahoma. His long-awaited sequel to Pulitzer Prize finalist There There, titled Wandering Stars, debuted in February. It traces the living legacy of Native persecution through 3 generations of a fractured but resilient family. Visit us online at clubbook.org for details on past and present seasons, sign up for our e-newsletter, check out our calendar, and so much more. Stay up to date with all of our events at our Club Book Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, find us using the handle ClubBookMN. And if you enjoy these free Club Book events and podcasts, remember to share them with your friends. They just may too. Thanks again to all those who make Club Book possible, including Melsa, Library Strategies, and Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Our sponsors include Red Balloon Bookshop, where you can purchase all the books featured in Club Book. Finally, a very special thank you to all the libraries hosting events this season. That's it for Club Book, the coolest club in town. We'll see you at the library.